welcome to today's edition of Living My Way. I have the pleasure of having a couple of fascinating guests with me today. Today I have Saleha Islam, CEO of Muslim Youth Helpline with me, and I have Noor Jahan, who's head of the charity I Dare You. Fascinating social welfare charities, I suppose you could describe them broadly as. But Saleha, your work at Muslim Youth Helpline deals with young people. Yes. It's a massive issue for the Muslim community. Often we sweep our issues under the carpet. So I'm going to come onto your charity and discuss what you do and what your aims are and where you are with all that work. And with Noor Jahan, again, you're dealing with some really challenging areas yourself with the I Dare You charity. But before we go on to exactly what the charities are about, I'm quite fascinated about your journeys, your personal journeys to this point, and how you've reached these positions, these very, very responsible positions within these charities which are helping the Muslim community. Your background originally, you're from Bangladesh originally.
Well, I'm born here. I'm born here. And basically, it is very interesting because when I was studying, I was going to be a doctor, allegedly, as most Asians, kind of start out to be.
The doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yes, the doctor, lawyer, engineer. And it was my father's kind of dream to be that. However, my father actually fell ill. I'm the eldest of 3 children. And I've always been very studious. But actually, after my dad fell ill, I became very interested in the kind of social care realm, in social work, basically, in particular. And I got married very young. I got married at the age of 16 because my father thought he was going to pass away. He became disabled after he had a heart attack. And so things happened for me very kind of quickly. I had to mature very quickly, being the eldest in the family, getting married early. And also my father was in the restaurant trade. He opened up one of the very first restaurants in Luton in the 40s. Because he came
in the 1940s.
Yes, he came in 1945 to this country. He was one of those seamen that wanted to travel, ran away, and came to this country. And so basically, he was kind of a bit of a leader in the community. And so when he fell ill, as a young person, I was helping Dad look after the business. So I had to grow up very quickly in many ways. So although 16, I probably was more like a 26-year-old, if that. So anyhow, the kind of whole thing around being a doctor kind of slipped, but I became very interested in people, just various through my dad and the kind of work that he did with others, supporting other people from back home, etc. And so I basically started off working in a hospital as an interpreter. And through that, I just realised that what people were going through. I worked in, which is now the London Hospital, and there was a lot of racism going on in the 80s. Women were treated terribly in the maternity wards, etc. And that's when I decided that I wanted to train up to be a social worker. And at the time, I think that probably in the UK, maybe 1 or 2 so-called Asian social workers. So it was interesting. I had a lot of opposition. They were like, "Oh, you want to train up to be a social worker?" It felt as though that maybe I couldn't be a social worker. So actually, I kind of gave up a very good job to train up. I had no money for about 2 years to train. And so I trained up and I began then working in lots of different places, so in kind of local authorities. And I've had over 25 years of kind of working within the social care field. And within that, I've not only been a social worker, I've been a manager, I trained up and did various things. And also Islamic counselling, solution-focused psychotherapy, management consulting, lots and lots of different things. And I tended to work with non-Muslims. So most of my work had been with vulnerable families, children, in the wider society. And if they happen to be, Asians or Muslim, then fine. But I didn't necessarily seek out to work with that community. But in my personal time, I wanted to work with the community. So I became involved in lots of organisations. I was a founder trustee of the Muslim Cultural Heritage Centre, which is a mosque in Kensington. And I think at the time there probably wasn't any Muslim trustees, women trustees in a mosque. And people found it incredibly kind of interesting that I was a trustee of a mosque. But the way I came in, I felt it was kind of quite natural. And in fact, I had a lot of respect for the people that I worked with. In fact, I think I really was able to kind of understand how a lot of kind of the Muslim men felt and thought. And, you know, I learnt a lot. Anyhow, I also worked at the NSPCC for a long time. And interestingly enough, I also became a trustee of the Muslim Youth Helpline before I became the CEO recently. And I find it really interesting that Allah Ta'ala kind of, you know, does things, and you have one plan and Allah has another plan for you. And so basically I left the NSPCC recently, and I was approached by MYH to come and do some work for them. And I thought, you know what? I think everything that I've done in the last 25 years leads me to kind of want to do this work, because the Muslim community needs to have skills of organisation, of professionalism, and inshallah, I think I can bring that to this organisation.
So your journey fascinates me. I mean, gives us an idea of how you got there, and it's like an amazing sort of long journey. But along the way, I mean, we'll come on to Muslim Youth Helpline and the work that you're doing there in the latter part of the show. But what were the trials and tribulations? Can you remember some pivotal points in your life which would have either made or broke you? I mean, you must have come across problems along the way. And what were the low points and what were the high points?
You know, I think for me, basically, I think schooling was very difficult. I faced a lot of racism when I was at school. I grew up in an area where there were hardly any Asian people, and I had to really toughen up. And, you know, I find it incredibly distressing that as a young person, I couldn't have an easy life at school. You know, people talk about school as though that was the best years of their life. Primary school was hell for me. Absolute hell.
Can you remember something particular?
I laugh about it now, but I mean, just being called names like, you know, you're a Paki, you're this, you're that. And there was no 9/11, 7/7 then, of course. But just generally, it was the whole thing about just being brown and just being different. And I remember this group of boys, they were bullying me. And there's me by myself. And nobody actually supported me. There was no anti-bullying policy in that day. And I had to, you know, I had to stick up for myself, and I had to fight them in the playground. And, you know, and there's me sort of like, I felt kind of very vulnerable. You know, no one to support me. I just had to kind of fight my corner, and I had to fight.
How did that affect you, do you think, on an emotional level? Where were you?
I think it's very difficult, because when I tried to explain to my parents, they couldn't really understand. It was just like, oh, just go and talk to your teacher. But the teachers actually, you know, it was very difficult to talk about it. And so I felt very alone. You know, you had to literally turn to your own resources. It was very, you know, it was very difficult, because I think a lot of parents in those days couldn't understand why kids would pick on you at school, because they hadn't been to school themselves here. So they couldn't understand that. And I think, you know, the way people cope is either you become very quiet and introverted, or you become very tough. So I was somebody who was quite introverted. You know, people can't believe it now when they see me or speak to me. But I actually had to kind of become quite a different person. And this continued actually in secondary school. In fact, we had a really big fight. We went to a girls' school at the beginning. And it was interesting how incredibly, if I can use the word, bitchy girls were towards Asian girls. And me and my sister were picked on, and there was about 40, 50 girls who literally kind of had a big fight with us. And that was really shocking, and that's when we had to change schools. So bullying was a big thing in my life.
And that's something which still exists, and in fact it's highlighted in modern schools, and we'll come on to that and look at how bullying and so the Muslim Youth Helpline might be one of the kind of issues, many issues I'm sure you deal with. But I mean, I'm going to come on to Nur Jahan because that's a fascinating journey, and we're going to come on to the upsides of perhaps that really very difficult, childhood in a way that you had when you were out at school, and look at how that might have made you stronger, perhaps, and able to take on other issues in your later life. I want to explore a little bit of that. But Nurjan, does your background resonate with what Saleha is talking about? Although you're a slightly different generation, perhaps, but did you have any similar experiences, and how did you come to be where you are?
I do resonate to a lot of what Saleha just said. My journey really began when my dad died when I was 17. So when he passed away, he was my only advocate for education. And I'm one of 7, and all my 4 brothers are older than me. But I was somebody that was the feistiest in my family, I suppose. Always wanted something different and always questioned why, which I got into a lot of trouble for throughout my teens.
So asking why? Asking
the why question. So if somebody's saying, you should do this because our religion says so, I'm saying, well, does it really? And why does it say? Can you please explain it? And traditionally, you don't ask that question why. You just do what you
how did your parents react to that first?
They never liked it. I'll be honest with you, they never liked it. Till this day, my mum can make it a comment in a joking way, you've not changed since. You was questioning things. So when my father passed away when I was 17, I was in first year of A-levels. I wanted to go into university, but my dad was no longer around to support and push that for me. So the only thing that they thought to do was to try and get me married, but that didn't happen. In the end, I managed to take a gap year after finishing my second year of A-levels so I can raise the funds to go university, because I went around asking my community elders, saying, invest in me. It was the year that Blair came into power and abolished grants. So I said, if you invest in me, then I'll not only will pay you that money back, but it'll invest into your akhirah. And that's the kind of spiel I was giving when I was younger. So in the end, I had to work 4 jobs round the clock to make enough money to pay for my first year fees. When I eventually did go into university, then I'm somebody within my community, I was the first one to go to university. None of the brothers within the community were going. None of my own brothers went to university. So I was doing something that was very against the norm.
What area did you grow up in?
East London, Tower Hamlets this is. Okay. And it's populated with Bengalis, and it's not a done thing. Now it sounds strange because if you don't go to university, it's even more strange. So when I was 19, I had a lot of problems at home, and I mean a lot of problems. And eventually I did something that was against the norm in such a huge way. I left home. I left home at 19.
Okay, what were the problems?
The problem was my mother was still sick from the moment my dad passed away, so she wasn't her strong usual self to kind of manage everything at home. My brothers, unfortunately, did not agree with me going on to university. There was some violence at home. The community wasn't supporting me. I was branded all sorts because I'm going home late because I'm working part-time. And I would be called all sorts, saying, you're with boys, you're drinking, you're raving, you're clubbing, whatever they chucked at me. They mentioned many things. Eventually, I had to leave home because I was physically being stopped to go to university. And I did something that you don't do as a young Muslim girl, leave your father's home. I'm married. So I did something, and one day that left, I was ousted by my community. I eventually went into living halls. This is towards the end of my first year of university. And when I lived in halls, I had no money. I only had 1 part-time job as opposed to 2. I wasn't able to maintain my rent. And one night I went home and I found myself evicted.
So you were homeless?
I was homeless. And I spent in total 13 months being homeless. 4 of those months I spent sofa surfing. And by that I mean I made use of all my favourites from my friends. And I must stress they were all my non-Muslim friends, because I was a very proud girl, young feisty girl then. I had a lot of pride in me, and I never wanted anybody to say to me, I told you so, that you could not make it. So I led a double life, and it sounds weird, I know, but I did very much lead a double life where by day I was a student and by night I was homeless. So about 3 to 4 months I sofa surfed, maxed out on all my favours, and it was very hard because I was in my hijab and I was never comfortable enough to open my hijab and sleep. The sofas were never long enough because I'm a very tall person, so I was never able to sleep on the sofa. It was always on the floor. Eventually, a lot of friendships were broken because of I maxed out on those favours. And my first night I spent in central London on a bus depot with my infamous rucksack. And that was probably one of the most frightening nights of my life, because from having everything down to nothing, just my backpack, was a very challenging time.
And where were your parents and your brothers at this time?
They were home. They had no idea this was going on. I wasn't able to, I felt I could not go back to them.
So your pride was telling you couldn't tell them now what your
Because
situation
of the
was.
treatment and the way that they lacked understanding. See, nobody understood why I wanted to go and seek education. And the way I saw education at that time was my escape route. I always believed education was going to be the doorway to give me something much better in life. And they never understood that, because nobody had that desire to go and seek education. So this is why I felt I could not go back into my community. So after being homeless the first night in central London, I didn't sleep at night at all. However, through that process, I spent about a couple of nights in hostels, but that was even more frightening than being on the streets, because hostels don't actually have locks on the doors, so anybody can come in. So you're exposed to drugs, to prostitution, pimps coming in and out the hostels. So I thought it's safer for me to be awake at a bus depot sometime. Because I had no money, I would eat at gurdwaras, I would eat at temples because they serve vegetarian food. I would eat at soup kitchens. In the winter months, I stayed in church halls. And that's how I managed the remainder months. Eventually, a non-Muslim took me in, and she gave me room in her house. She gave me a master room. And she said to me that as long as you can pay for your halal food, I don't want nothing for you. I don't want nothing from you in terms of rent or contribution to the bill. Just stay here as long as you promise me you don't go back out on the streets. And for me, that was a very pivotal moment in my life. Because
how did you feel at that time?
A mixture of emotions. Because I knocked on many Muslim doors, and I knocked on many mosque doors and many other institution doors, but nobody helped me. Everybody refused to help me. They kept passing the buck. Oh, so-and-so will help you. Go to that mosque, go to this place. But they didn't want to take responsibility, no accountability. And I said, I need help. Nobody's going to help me. If you don't help me, who's going to help me? But they all turned me down. Now, this is a non-Muslim that was able to relate to me on a human level, and I have pure and sheer, nothing but humanity, that she took me in and she gave me a home for another 11 months in her house. So for me, that was a very crucial point, because I was exposed to prostitution, I was exposed to drugs and alcohol whilst being on the streets. So, and I could have very easily fallen into any one of those negative behaviours at any one time. But alhamdulillah, my faith was very strong. I always believed that there's something better for me and I need to be patient. I always had this belief. Even though I may not have prayed salah or prayed 5 times a day, I knew that much. So eventually, when she did take me, I was able to continue my education and go on to do my master's.
Well, that's, for me, even now in the 21st century, and I've seen a lot and heard a lot, even for me, that's a shocking story. Because the things, a lot of people out there live in very safe environments, and a lot of parents, a lot of Muslim parents will try to say, like, we've got the ideal environment. Look, we're Muslim, and we've got the ideal deen, and therefore we're the best in terms of the way we raise our children. And it's all those secular people, it's all those Western people that are wrong. That's very much an attitude of almost denial at times that I see. And we always think, our community's perfect, our society's better, we're better than all the problems that go out there in Western society. But from your story, Nurjahan, I'm picking up that the one thing that she did was ask why. Questioning led to this situation where then both sets of parties, i.e. your family, the traditional family, and you were at loggerheads, and it went out of control. That you go into a situation where you now are a proud person, and once you've gone on a path, you've got to fight your own way. Your family's not able to handle it or understand it, or don't want to be seen to be shamed in the community because their daughter's gone out and on her own. And there's this kind of absolute shocking thing for me, which is that you're then passed on from place to place. And Muslim institutions, Muslims aren't able to come in and deal with this situation and say, look, we've got to actually deal with this. This is our problem. This is our situation. Now, that brings me nicely on to Muslim Youth Helpline. Whilst in our individual worlds, there may be very middle-class families out there that don't have any of these issues or think they don't have these issues. There might be very working-class Muslim families that perhaps are aware of these issues but then don't want to wash their dirty laundry in public as they see it. And it's not dirty laundry, it's actually real issues. But the way sometimes the community thinks is shame comes first. You know, their honour, their shame, you know, not being seen to be bad. This is a major problem for the community. How much of that do you see in Muslim Youth Helpline and the cases that you're dealing with young people? And given that both of you have had tough backgrounds, clearly the empathy for you guys from what your experiences were is now manifesting itself in the work that you're doing in terms of helping other young people. I can see where your motivation comes from, because you've lived the experience in many ways of bullying, the toughness of living out there. Now, I'm going to just introduce our viewers to a little report before I come on to organisationally where that's taken you, because we've heard about some of your personal journeys. And the positive thing is that you're now leading organisations from those tough experiences. The fantastic thing is that, yes, we've got a couple of people who are now contributing in their lives, or have been contributing brilliantly. So it's an example to everybody how a tough existence can lead to some really, really healthy outcomes. And I'd like to focus on that as well. But we're just going to show this brief report about, I believe it's about the Muslim Youth Helpline. Do join us right after that to go a little bit more about how the ladies are actually dealing with these situations in the modern Muslim era, if you like, here in Britain.
It's about 0.5 grams a day. If you can help me.
To stop feeling so worthless. My doctor doesn't understand or even care, so I've stopped taking my antidepressant, and now my life is spiraling
out of control. I know it's haram to self-harm, but seeing the blood flow eases the pressure in my head.
I can still hear his footsteps stopping outside my bedroom door. I feel dirty. I ask Allah, why would my uncle do this to me?
It's so unfair. Why do they pick on me? Please help me, because I am suffering every minute of every hour of every day.
Just a few of the 24,000 calls, emails, letters and web chats the Muslim Youth Helpline has handled since it began in 2001.